And we're back once again, only on it's Last Call. Last Call, the alcohol, only on the lastcallpodcast.com. And joining me here, we are blessed. We've been having a lot of, have you seen, we've had some Browns talk, we've had some draft talk, combine talk. We got to get a guy from the NFL who's going to tell us what's going on, including what the Cinderella story of the year of the NFC side, that is your Chicago Bears. So I bring in a guy who is not afraid to pull any punches, take any dives, and he is definitely going to tell us what's going on in the Chicago Bears world. I give you Bears and NFL Draft Insider for his own Substack for PF SN and a bunch of other sites here we're going to talk about. I give you Bears guru Jacob Infante. So Jacob, we'll start off here with how big of a success was this season? And how much, when you look at the season, do you have hope and sort of confidence in the future?
So, I mean, I'd say this was a big success for the Bears, obviously coming from a 5-12 season under Matt Eberflus last year. Uh, and then with Thomas Brown coming in as the interim for those last few games to turn it around to be an 11-6 team, winning the NFC North, winning a playoff game, beating the Packers in the playoffs, mind you, and then also going 2-1 against the Packers in the three games they played. That's a pretty strong season, all things considered, given where they were last year and how quick the turnaround was under new coach Ben Johnson. I bring up the Packers bit especially because I mean it's the biggest rivalry they have. It's one of, if not the biggest rivalries in the NFL of all time, and it's one that's been pretty one-sided, dominant by the Packers the last decade or so, and it's something that's taken a toll on the Bears fan base, on the organization, on leadership, on players. And so to be able to win that series and to be able to pick up a playoff win, it's their first playoff win in 15 years. So this is definitely a success, whichever way you want to make it. And obviously, it was disappointing to see, the way the overtime loss played out, but against the Rams in the divisional round. But to make it to the divisional round was huge. It was a close game. It was well competed. Uh, Makes me excited for the future because I think this is only year one in Ben Johnson's offense. It's year one of this coaching staff. It seems to be a good amount of uh, stability, continuity going into year two. I mean, seems as though, you knock on wood, you're retaining offensive coordinator Declan Doyle, even though Ben Johnson's the play caller on offense, having Doyle has been a helpful piece. I know he's interviewing for the Ravens OC job right now. I know he also backed out of the Eagles. So time will tell. You have Dennis Allen returning for another year as the defensive coordinator. A lot of key assistants returning on both sides of the ball. You lost Eric Bieniemy. Maybe you lose Al Harris as well, but for the most part, a lot of guys seem to be coming back, uh, which I think is huge. And then you have a lot of young, really talented players on offense. Give them another year to digest the playbook, understand the system, and work on some of the flaws that they have. Specifically, guys like Caleb Williams, Luther Burden, Colston Loveland, Roma Dunze. Those four in particular, I think giving them another year in the offense and watching them continue to develop, I think is going to be huge. So it's a great year for the Bears, all things considered, and it's got me pretty excited for what next year is going to look like as well.
What makes Ben Johnson different from other people? And when I mean others, like we've seen Matt Nagy, Arthur Smith, Mike McDaniel. We can even throw in guys such as Nathaniel Hackett. Uh, who can forget, Adam Gase, even Shane Steichen, where it's like, yeah, you have a hot flavor offensive coordinator, you have all these tricky plays, and then they might have some initial success, but it's like, okay, you're just a guy burying his nose in the play calling sheet, and you don't know how to run a team. Like you've been around him. Like, why is Ben Johnson having success despite the fact that he didn't come from the Shanahan McVay tree, and this is a franchise which has seen its fair share of like one-hit wonder coaches.
So I'd say a lot of it to this point. Obviously, you mentioned the offensive play caller, wonderkin, whatever. And Ben Johnson fits that criteria. I'd also say what separates him from a lot of those guys, a lot of those one-year wonders, is one, the leadership aspect. I mean, this is a guy that the team rallies around, they get behind, they trust. And I mean, he's intense. He's very intricate in, understanding and making sure the guys understand the details. He does a really good job of that. And these guys can really get behind him. And, the more that he pushes them, he knows how to get through to them and how to elaborate on what's really one of the more intricate schemes in the NFL right now. So I'd say that the ability to rally the team around him and around this organization, and also the ability to make adjustments. I mean, we see so many times the Bears start off slow and they kick things up in the second half, specifically in the fourth quarter. They come from behind, they pick up the win. It's same old song and dance. It happened so many times this season where it looked like the Bears were out, but they adjusted on both sides of the ball. They, took a look at what the defense was giving them. They took a look at what the offense was giving them, and then changed their strategy and adjusted coming out of halftime, which I think, especially for the Bears, is something that's really been missing with coaching staffs that they've had, where even Nagy, like, sometimes, they'll go out hot, but it's not consistent every single time that they're going to be able to adjust to what the other team is showing them. Eberflus certainly struggled with that, even worse. So to see Ben Johnson, to see Dennis Allen, to see Declan Doyle, all these guys being able to change the game plan and to be like, to have I'm trying to think of the best word to put it, but to be able to understand, like, hey, this isn't working. I need to acknowledge that. I need to own up to it, that accountability aspect, and to say, this is how we're going to change it going forward. This is how we're going to adjust. I think that's something that Bears coaches have struggled with for such a long time. And it sounds like a bare minimum for an NFL head coach to be able to do, to make adjustments, but you'd be surprised just how many Bears coaches, NFL coaches in general, just are so stubborn and unwilling to move off of their plan and to acknowledge they're wrong and to make changes on the fly. So I think that's one thing already we're seeing with Johnson that's really different from a lot of coaches in the space.
So here's the question. I know it's on your mind, probably a lot of Bears fans' mind. Will that stubbornness get him in trouble going forward in terms of he went for it a lot in the Rams game? And I get it. The stat nerds say, hey, 4th and 1, go for it. 4th and 2, go for it. And that's the analytics crew. And we've seen the better coaches sometimes have somebody telling them, look, this is, the field's getting away. We just need points. Just don't go 50-50 on something. Is there a plan for him to bring somebody in and basically be the contrarian, to be able to tell him, look, Ben, you can't keep going for it all the time. You can't, just like Dan Campbell, you're going to get burned. I mean, is there somebody he can bring in to be I hate to say voice of reason, but maybe the voice of caution?
I mean, in theory, sure. I don't know exactly who that would be or what role that would be, because it all varies depending on what a coach's mentality is, more so than a specific role. But I'd say it's something the Bears have in their front office right now, where Ian Cunningham, who's a finalist for the GM role with the Falcons, he's the current assistant GM with the Bears. He's been the voice of reason for Ryan Poles, where Poles has been more aggressive and been like, hey, we should trade up for this guy. We should be willing to pay this guy a little bit more. Where Cunningham comes in and he's like, all right, let's act within reason here. And, like you said, sometimes the aggressiveness plays out, sometimes it doesn't. So it's definitely something that Johnson's going to need to be able to balance a little bit more. I mean, I understand, given how high the stakes there were, being aggressive and wanting to go for it, especially with how the Bears defense was for a lot of this year. Not necessarily the most consistent in coverage, not necessarily the most reliable four-man rush along the defensive line. So going forward, in theory, it's like, all right, we got to score more points than the other team, that being the main focus. Defense, whatever, maybe we catch a lucky break here and there. I would have gone for, going back to that Rams game, I would have gone for it, or I would have gone for the field goal on that first offensive drive where they went for it. They drove down the field, went for it on 4th down. They had an easy field goal ahead of them. And then they didn't convert on 4th down. And ultimately, a field goal ended up being the decider of who won and lost that game. So it's easy to say in hindsight, oh, we should have done that. Oh, we shouldn't have done that. So maybe they could have they could figure out, all right, who's going to be the voice of reason here. I know that Johnson comes from like an analytical computer science type of background. So naturally, I feel like he's going to trust the numbers a little bit more. But at the same time, there are instances where it's like, all right, go with your gut here more so than whatever the numbers tell you.
He's had success. And as you said, first time in 15 years they've won a playoff game. Now we got to build off of that. So for next season, this because we're going to talk about a lot of this for this show. How does he get, improvements from the team? Let's start with the quarterback. You have Caleb Williams, who when he's on, he's as talented as almost anybody there is, even Patrick Mahomes, even Josh Allen. When he's off, it gets ugly. So how does Ben sort of improve him? I mean, is it more mental? Is it more like analytical? Is there things that you see that, Caleb could do that he could do on his own? Like, how does Ben Johnson go about sort of tweaking Caleb and who he is?
Honestly, I think a lot of it's mechanical. I think when going to watch him, his deep ball improved significantly this year. His sack avoidance improved significantly this year. His accuracy on screens and passes behind the line of scrimmage improved in the second half of the year. But throughout the year, that range of 10 to 19 air yards just wasn't all that great. And I think a lot of that comes down to timing and it comes down to footwork. I mean, especially when it comes to throwing the ball down the sidelines, and hitting it outside the numbers. I think there are a couple instances where, per game really, where Caleb he airmailed a lot of his targets, and I think a lot of that comes down to footwork. Really, just being a little skittish, not as confident in his movements, and not as confident in his dropbacks and identifying. All right, I need to follow through here, or I need to start I need to transition out of my drop back into my throw here. And because really a lot of the quarterback position comes down to footwork. If you don't have your footwork right, then it's really difficult to be accurate, no matter how strong your arm is, no matter how good your internal clock is. Uh, and that's the same in any sport, really. If you can have all the physical tools in the world, but if your footwork isn't good, then you're not really going to amount to too much. So I think Caleb's improved his footwork, like I said, on screens. He's improved the footwork on the deep ball, and he has that natural timing of when to get the ball out and the natural timing of, all right, this is the right read to make. There were very few instances over the course of the year he did make bad reads. Every quarterback does. He's no exception, but it just didn't happen very often. The big issue to me is the footwork, the mechanics on that intermediate game, because if you can get that done, then and you're able to move the ball down the field in consistent 15 to 20-yard chunks, then you're consistently moving down the field. So I'd say that's the big thing I'd look for this offseason. I'm not incredibly worried that he isn't going to get better at it. Like I said, given the fact that he had clear weaknesses as a rookie and he cleaned up a handful of them, now he has fewer weaknesses, but he still has to clean that up. So I have no doubt that that's going to be an emphasis this offseason. And I'm sure he knows it too. The numbers back me up on it. The film backs me up on it. So I think that that's something that he's really going to push on this offseason.
I know the traditional feeling is there's two ways to teach a young quarterback. The first one is you give him a simple plan, and then if once he gets that, you just add on, add on, add on until he gets too full. We've heard, with Ben Johnson, it was you throw everything at him the first day, almost like putting a fire hose and flooding him with stuff, and then whatever he picks, great. Whatever he doesn't, you basically take off the plate. Does that change going into this year? Now that Ben sort of knows what Caleb can do and can't do, will it get easier for him to, go into the preseason, the offseason, go, all right, hey, I know he can do this. Now I can focus more on, hey, fixing what he can't do and more on what we want to do, but he wasn't ready for yet.
Yeah, so I think Ben Johnson is an intense individual. He's very deep in the weeds, very detail oriented, and it's not the right coach for everybody. Some players don't have that mentality where they can deal with someone who's so detail oriented, someone who's so intense, and I think that Caleb is one of those guys though, where he can handle that level of coaching, where it's almost the exact opposite of Eberflus, who is very hands off, laissez faire, and nobody was really there in the weeds with him every single week, critiquing him, being like, "Hey, you need to get your stuff together." And sometimes that rude awakening can be exactly what you need. And obviously I'm not in those the coaching meetings or anything like that, but you get the sense that knowing Johnson, knowing some of the other coaches on this staff, that that's what was going on. Uh, so I think that Johnson now has a good understanding of what Caleb can take and what he can't take. And it's a feeling out process. Anytime there's a new head coach or a new boss in anything, really, it's a feeling out process. You get to understand the the personalities, the mental acuity of everybody involved. And it really, I think now Johnson has a good understanding of what Caleb can and can't do, what he can and can't handle. And, you approach from there. And I get the sense that Caleb is more intense than most players. And I think that's standard for the quarterback position, really. So I'd say that it's definitely going to be a more tailored approach this offseason compared to last offseason, which I think is really only going to benefit not just Caleb, but the whole offense as well.
Well, speaking of off season, so let's start with the Senior Bowl. You were supposed to go. Unfortunately, like a lot of us here, Mother Nature decided, no, I got other plans, and we got one of the worst ice snowstorms in some parts where it rivaled 40 years ago. Yes, that's how wonderful these things are. So, but you have your scouts in there. You're finding out what's going on. So tell me, what are the Bears right now looking at? I mean, from what you have an idea, like what is Ryan Poles looking at in terms of like college players that he might want to draft? Like where I guess is going to be the focus right now for the draft if you are the Bears?
So I'd assume that the biggest priority is the defensive line. And, it helps that this year the Senior Bowl has an incredibly talented group of defensive linemen. But like I mentioned earlier, like I alluded to, the Bears four-man rush just couldn't get home. I mean, the consistent pressure off the edge, along the interior, you name it, it just wasn't there. I mean, Montez Sweat had a solid season, but it still wasn't up to par to what they're paying him. Javon Dexter can get sacks, but he's a liability against the run, and the pressures aren't always consistently there. Grady Jarrett didn't live up to his free agency price. Neither did Dio Odeyingbo before he got hurt. Austin Booker has proven to be a good rotational pass rusher, but I don't know if he can be more than that because the pressure isn't consistent and the run defense isn't all that great. Andrew Billings had the worst season of his career, arguably, this year at defensive tackle. So that to say, and also Shamar Turner, they're one of their second round picks out of Texas A&M. He only played a few games this year before he suffered a season-ending injury. There's a lot that went wrong for the defensive line, and like I said, at the Senior Bowl this year, especially off the edge, it's a loaded group. And early in the practices, again, like you said, I'm not there in Mobile this year. I was last year, not last year, 2 years ago, but I wasn't able to make it this year. But all things considered, it's a group that's really shining down in Mobile this year. And you factor in defensive tackles, like I know Lee Hunter out of Texas Tech was a standout in the Senior Bowl, and obviously down the stretch this past season he was tremendous for the Red Raiders. And other edge rushers too, TJ Parker from Clemson, really establishing himself, saying like, "Hey, I am a first round pick. I know my numbers dropped, but the tape's still there, and the practice is now there as well." So all that to say, it's a really loaded defensive line group. I'd be stunned if the Bears don't take advantage of it in the early rounds this year. I'd be surprised if they don't go two defensive linemen with one of their first three picks. I don't know if they do the first two exactly, but I wouldn't be surprised if, say, the first or third round or the second and third round, or they come away with two new defensive linemen, because that's definitely a weakness of this group right now.
Caleb Banks is an interesting guy that I've heard sort of floated with the Bears in terms of you look at him and he fits what I'm guessing Dennis Allen wants in a defensive tackle. He's 6'6", 330. When he's on, he is just this force of nature that many have called compared to Chris Jones. Just can get into the backfield, can, you know, has good pass rushing skills, can, is solid against the run, a guy that you look at. The question is always, well, he only played 2 games last year due to a foot injury. He came back, but it was the last 2 games of the season. Is this going to be, a lingering issue? Because hey, he's a big boy, 6'6", 330. You know, th- do the Bears take a risk with a guy like that, where he probably, in a normal year, he came out last year, he's probably a top 10 pick, top 15. Now he probably falls to maybe late first, second round. Does Ryan Poles take, Ryan Poles being the gambler that he is, does he go with that, or do they go with maybe more, well, Lee Hunter's been more healthy. Well, Dante, Dominique Orange is more the run stuff. Like, what would you, if you were the Bears, who would you target if you could only have one defensive tackle? And unfortunately, Peter Woods is off the table, and maybe Cade McDonald as well.
So, I mean, I definitely take a look at Caleb Banks, especially going off of his 2024 season as a sophomore. There's a lot to like there. You mentioned the size, long arms. He has the power. He has the athleticism you want in a defensive tackle. Very high ceiling, I believe. And I think if Ryan Poles does decide to go through with that, with drafting him, I think a lot of that would come down to how the medicals play out at the combine. So, obviously, a big reason that they organize everyone at the combine for Indy, you talk about the drills, the interviews as well, but also the medicals to get the understanding of how, given a player's injury history, how does everything look? Are there any issues about, certain muscles degrading, certain bones that, aren't looking right? So that would have to clear out with Caleb Banks for him to be, a late round pick for the Bears there, or late first round, I should say. If I had to pick one defensive tackle, it would be Caden McDonald. I know you said that he's, if he'd be off the board in this situation, I'd love, I'd love Daryl Jackson Jr. out of Florida State on day 2. If that's if that's round 3, that'd be amazing. I don't think he's going to fall that far to the late third round. I'd take him in the late second round. Honestly, I think he's an interesting case because he dominated at the Shrine Bowl. He was tremendous at Florida State, and he got the late call up to the Senior Bowl. So that's something that doesn't happen a ton, or at least it didn't happen very much before the schedule shifted, and it allowed Shrine Bowl standouts to get the late Senior Bowl invite. So Jackson's a guy. He's big, long arms, powerful, similar build to Caleb Banks. Maybe he's not athletic, but I'd argue he, wins more with leverage in the run game. He's, powerful. He can eat up gaps up the middle. I think there's a little bit of pass rushing upside there. He's more of a run stuffer, but I think the ceiling is very high with him as a run defender at the next level. So Jackson's going to be my pick. If I can only take one defensive tackle from this class, I'd say as a realistic option for the Bears, I'd take Jackson out of FSU, and then, look to get an edge rusher in the first round, or maybe they sign someone in free agency, or maybe they trade for someone. Who knows? But Jackson's a guy that I really like.
How much does it come down to the unknown, which is Jeremy Garrett? Like he's a defensive line coach, and he's not a big name. I mean, this isn't like Joe Cullen, who everybody sort of knows. This isn't like, it escapes my mind, the Eagles defensive line coach. Once again, another guy who has developed pass rushers. He's one of those younger coaches that, Ben Johnson is hired and brought along. What do we know about him? Is he a guy who could develop these guys? Is he somebody who prefers more veteran offensive defensive linemen? Like, how big is it for him or for the Bears to have a guy who, if he gets one of those raw projects, whether it's Cade McDonald in the dream world, or you settle for Caleb Banks or even Lee Hunter, but he can quickly develop them to be 3 down linemen.
Yeah, so it's worth noting Garrett has only been an NFL defensive line coach. This will be his 3rd year. He spent a lot of time in college. He was an assistant defensive line coach with the Browns for a little bit too. So, admittedly, we don't really know a ton about what his preference is. I mean, obviously, the fact that he's coached at the collegiate level, I think, provides some reason to be optimistic as far as he's willing to work with these young guys, develop them. He knows how to get through to them. I mean, he was the defensive line coach at Auburn in 2023, and that Auburn defensive line, uh, Keldrick Falk was there in his rookie year, so there's a little bit of overlap there. I know Marcus Harris, a defensive tackle as well, who's there for a bit, who's now in the league. Justin Rogers as well, an NFLer, so he's had some success working with some of these younger defensive linemen and converting them into NFL ready talent. So I don't think it should be an issue necessarily if they want to draft a guy and be like, hey, we're going to put him in your hands. We trust that you can develop him, because he's shown he can do that at the collegiate level. So I'd expect some adjustment of contracts to move cap space around. I mean, it's not, they don't have a ton of cap space as things stand right now. They're actually in the red, but they do have a good amount of flexibility as far as restructures go. They can free up some cap space for this year, increase the cap hit in 2027 for guys that are going to be on the team in 2027. And even then, you have a ton of cap space in 2027 to begin with. So even if you eat into some of that, you still have a lot to work with. Cut maybe Dio, you cut Grady Jarrett, you're working with $60 million, $70 million in cap space, even with restructures. So that's what I expect they do in order to have a little bit of spending power this offseason. I don't know how big of a fish they're going to land off the edge, but I do expect that it's going to be I do expect it's going to be a priority in some aspect this offseason.
All right, so that leads me to the question on a lot of Bears fans' mind. No, Nahshon Wright. Well, he's in the Pro Bowl, so and he deserved it. Look, he had a fantastic year, led the team in interceptions. He made a lot of big plays. He was a guy that, if there were any questions going into the year, he answered them and then some going, in this year. But the bad part is he's going to want to get paid. So that's like right now. You're Ryan Poles. How much do you want Nahshon Wright back, and what's the number in terms of like, okay, we want you back, but not at this number?
It's going to be tough with him because obviously this is his only big year that he's had in the NFL. I mean, granted, making the Pro Bowl is huge. Tying for the lead with all cornerbacks and interceptions this year is tremendous. I mean, he only trailed Kevin Byard, his teammate at safety, for the league lead in interception. So it shows how much of a playmaker he really is. I'd say there are two obvious concerns with Wright as far as giving him big money. It's one, the fact that this is his only good year he's had in the NFL. Last year, he didn't play a ton with the Vikings. He was on the practice squad on the reserves contract and then got cut from his reserves contract before the Bears brought him in. So there's the risk of, maybe he's just a one-year wonder. Is this going to be sustainable? And then two, I'd speak to the inconsistency in coverage too, where yes, his 5 interceptions this season and 8 total turnovers were tremendously helpful for the Bears in that if he doesn't have some of those interceptions, maybe the offenses move down the field. Maybe they don't have as many of those comeback wins as they ended up having. Maybe they don't win the NFC North. Maybe they don't even make the playoffs. But there are also a good handful of instances of him consistently getting burned, especially late in the season, too. I mean, his interceptions were unbelievable early in the season, midway through the season. Late down the stretch, the turnovers didn't really come, and he got beat pretty consistently. So it's very much a boomer bust sort of cornerback, like a Trayvon Diggs, who, coincidentally enough, had great seasons under Al Harris, who's the Bears DB coach, unless he leaves for a defensive coordinator gig. So with someone like that, it's tough to tell. I'd be willing to pay as my ceiling $10 million a year. I anticipate he's going to get a few million more than that a year just because of how good how impactful his turnovers were this year. But in studying defensive backs and, being around the NFL for long enough, you start to see that turnovers aren't nearly as sustainable year over year as low passer ratings are, as low completion percentage allowed is. And statistics like that, that typically speaks more to who a cornerback is year over year and how talented they are on a consistent basis, more so than turnovers, where you have some of the best corners in the league only get like one interception, maybe two a year. And then those guys get the all pros over someone who has like five or six interceptions. And people say, oh, I wonder why. And a lot of that comes down to being a true shutdown corner and limiting the amount of negative plays. That's what teams are looking for, is that steady force at cornerback more so than that roller coaster up and down. So I'd peak at $10 million a year with Wright. I expect he's going to get more than that. And I expect that it's going to be a team other than the Bears who gives him that. So I'm happy for him. Obviously, it's a well deserved contract. He's going to make a lot of money off of this season. I just don't think it's going to be in Chicago.
I'm gonna flip the script on you a bit. How much when you say like he got beat a lot at the end of the year, and I get that. How much does that go into the fact though? Is he'll like him and his agent are gonna say the same thing you said earlier of the show? Hey, our defensive line wasn't that good. We had to cover more time because they couldn't get pressure. So I mean, again, I mean, how do you how do you fix that then? If let's say you let him go, will you find anybody better that can hold on to it? You can get for cheap amount of bucks without giving up away a first or second round talent because you want to save those for your defensive line. And again, as you see in the Bears game, sometimes they had to cover 4, 5, 6 seconds because the pass rush isn't getting there.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely argue that, there are some instances where that came into occasion, but I don't think it was that big of an issue uh, much this season to where when Wright ended up getting beat, it was because the defensive line didn't get home and the receivers had to improvise and scramble, and then they'd be able to break away and make a catch. That definitely happens sometimes, but I don't think it happened enough to the point where it can excuse some of the pure one on one, like 2 second, 3 second routes that were being run where Wright just got beat right out of the gate. And as far as a replacement goes, I think you have him on the roster already in Tyreek Stevenson, and is someone who's taken, who's a 2 year starter the first year, started a lot of 2025. He went to the bench when Jalen Johnson came back, but he still started most of the year for Chicago this year. And yes, obviously, you look at the interception numbers, Wright had five, Stevenson only had one. But to that same point, Wright allowed 8 touchdowns this year, and Stevenson only allowed one. Uh, so I think from a down by down consistency standpoint, Stevenson was the more reliable, steady cornerback. Uh, Definitely less flashy. And, how you argue that depends on how much you value turnovers as opposed to consistency and, reliable coverage, even if it's not super flashy. Me personally, I value the cornerback who's not going to give up as many big plays. I value the corner who's going to eliminate his assignment from the play, and to force the quarterback to go to his next read and to be able to, force him to panic a little bit, say, oh shoot, Stevenson covered this guy. Now I need to figure out who else is going to be open because my first choice wasn't there. And that's not to say Stevenson's amazing. That's not to say he's going to be an all pro or even a Pro Bowl corner like Wright ended up being. But I think the consistency is going to be a lot more aligned with what the league is looking for at the position. So I'd say just you stick with Jalen Johnson, Tyreek Stevenson, Kyler Gordon as your starting corners. You have depth options. Terrell Smith coming back from injury showed some intriguing flashes in 2024 last season. Zay Frazier missed the entire year with personal issues. Still don't know the full extent of that, but he came out of UTSA last year, a 6'3" corner running in the 4.2s. Just tremendous length, ball skills. Again, doesn't have that down by down consistency, but has the ability to make plays and has that elite raw athleticism that I think is going to serve him well as a rotational guy. And then Josh Blackwell off the nickel. I think they'll be in good shape as it stands at cornerback right now. Maybe they want to draft somebody in the third or fourth round. I'd be completely okay with that. But honestly, if they don't do anything major at cornerback and focus all their resources on the defensive line, I'd be okay with that for at least this offseason.
You mentioned that if the Bears won't take a big swing in free agency because they don't have the money. I mean, so If you're expecting Trey Hendrickson, Bears fans, I apologize. That probably won't happen. Somebody else with a lot more money will probably overpay for them. Same with Jalen Phillips. But do they go after, let's say, maybe that next tier down, whether it's an Odafe away, whether it's Kayvon Chasen? Do they even go after, maybe John Franklin Myers? Like, are there guys that you're looking at going, this is who the Bears might get? They're not too pricey, but there's still some money that we might force the Bears to cut some people, but they're worth the pickup.
Yeah, so they're luckily it's a pretty good group of edge rushers, especially in free agency this year. I've been doing my own research as far as who some of the top guys should be, as far as factoring in money, factoring age, pass rushing production, stuff like that. Uh, Jalen Phillips, like you mentioned, could be tough. Odafe always probably my first choice as far as like that next tier down, someone who's obviously a tremendous freak athlete, who's somebody who can get after the quarterback and generate sacks. Also, a lot better run defender than I think a lot of people recognize too. His run stop percentage was the highest of at least the top edge rushers heading into this free agency class, who are able to, who have enough of a sample size to be able to be considered as far as that percentage goes. So Alway would be my top choice. But really, I think you're probably, if you're signing a guy in free agency who's not Phillips, who's not Hendrickson, who's not Alway, you're probably looking at a short term option. And I think from there are a handful of veterans I'd consider. And the two that come front to mind are Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa. Obviously, they're both over 30. They're both, they have more football behind them than in front of them. But Mack is still performing at an extremely high level. He's a high level run defender, someone who, even if the sack numbers aren't as great as they used to be when he was in Oakland, when he was in Chicago, even for a little bit, the pressures are there. He's still a very talented technician, still very powerful, even if he's maybe a step slower than he used to be. And then Bosa was really efficient this year too for the Bills. I had some concerns considering how often he's been hurt, but he's been able, in Buffalo this year, he was able to put together really strong seasons against someone who can put pressure on the quarterback. Maybe not a flashy sacks guy, but someone who's going to disrupt plays. So I think if you're looking for a long-term fit, Always probably my top choice outside of that Hendrickson and Phillips tier. But realistically, I think that you're looking at a stopgap, 1 or 2 year starter, someone who's still going to be really good, but just because of age, they're not going to be a long-term guy. And then you draft an edge rusher early. So if they aren't able to afford making a splash like that, like Hendrickson, or trading for a Max Crosby or something like that, then I think that's probably the best approach to go with.
How realistic is Max Crosby? Because we've heard that the Bears are linked to being interested in Max Crosby. That, hey, the Bears have eyes, Max Crosby. So what's it gonna take? And we know Ryan Poles will probably go, let's do this. 2 first round picks, screw it. Max Crosby are worth it. Who's the guy who, if Cunningham leaves, is going to tell Ryan, no, 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 no. We can't just give up whatever Tom Brady wants. We got to hold out. You have to be disciplined.
Yeah. So as far as like that next man down, I can't speak to the personality of him because, we haven't seen him in a bigger role like that. But Jeff King, the senior director of player personnel, is probably the next man up who would get a promotion to assistant GM if Cunningham leaves. Again, I can't speak to his personality. If he's more of the, hey, let's slow your roll a little bit here, or if he's another aggressive swing for the fences type of go getter. Uh, but Jeff King would be the next man up, and he's another guy. He's interviewed for GM positions before, or at least been on the radar as a potential future GM. So I think he's someone who's going to be able to collaborate with Poles, and if Cunningham leaves, I think he'd work into being that right hand man.
What should they give up for Max Crosby? Like, let's say you're the guy. You have the year of Ryan Poles, and Ryan's going, hey, 2 first round draft picks. That sounds right. We do that. And you're probably going, hey, wait, let's only give him this. Like, What should be a realistic price to get Max Crosby if the Bears and the Raiders are both interested in doing this deal?
So I'd be willing for Crosby. I'd be willing to give up a first round pick and a second round pick. And I wouldn't go with two firsts because comparing it to like a Khalil Mack trade where he was right at the end of his rookie deal, Crosby's firmly in the middle of another deal right now, and he's eventually going to have to get paid again. Like he's 28 years old. He'll turn 29 before the start of the regular season. Him being a couple of years older than Mack was when he got traded, a few years older than Micah Parsons when he got traded this past offseason. I think that's going to cut the I think that's going to cut the haul a little bit. Obviously, it's going to be still pretty expensive to acquire him, and that's not even including the salary aspect. That's just looking at it from a draft capital standpoint. But I feel like a first and second would be huge. I think if you can get the Raiders to agree to that, I think they're going to want a first rounder this year and a second rounder next year. Just because of the thinking, oh, well, you're a good team this year. If you have Crosby, you're going to be even better. So that first round pick is going to be less valuable. We want what we expect to be the earlier of the two first round picks. That and just naturally draft picks this year are going to be more valuable than next year. Uh, not to speak on the quality of the draft class. If anything, the 2027 class is going to be really good, but that's just the way that draft picks work. You don't know how the team's going to do next year. There's a lot of uncertainty as far as, all right, well, who's going to be there? Who are going to be the top guys that we're looking at? So much can and will change, and all of that unpredictability naturally decreases the value of some of those draft picks. So I think they'd want a first rounder this year, and the Raiders going to push for another first rounder next year. But I think if you can get them down to a second rounder, I think that's a price I'd be willing to pay if I'm the Bears.
It goes back to Nahshon Wright. It's inflation. Like you mentioned before, like you said with Nahshon, you were only going to pay him 10 million. Him and his age are going to look at you, Jacob, and go, "Wait a minute here. Whoa, 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 whoa. Carlton Davis got 20 million. We're just as good as Carlton Davis, and hey, we got less mileage on our tires. We don't get injured as much. So we'd like 18, 20 million. How do you if a Raiders go say, hey, whoa, 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 whoa. Micah Parsons got two first round draft picks and he got a young player. Hey, they also had to pay him a huge, ridiculous salary. You're actually getting a couple years on Max Crosby. Like, how tough is it when you know the Raiders are going to probably dig their heels in and go, we want two firsts. You're getting a Pro Bowler, face of a franchise. Hey, you're trying to win the Super Bowl before you get to pony up for Caleb. So again, how tough is it for a lot of these things you and the Bears want to do when, well, just like inflation, everything's going up and nothing ever seems to really go down?
Yeah, so to that point, to touch on the cornerback too, I'd say Carlton Davis is one, a significantly better corner, and two, just a more consistent year by year player. That's someone who's started in the league for quite some time, someone who's had a sustained track record of success. So in that case, I'd say if you want 18 to 20 million, happy trails, like I'd send you off to the open market. If that's what you're looking for, I'm not even going to bother to negotiate with you. We have a good corner in Stevenson we can replace you with. That's not the battle we're trying to fight. Now with Crosby, it would be a little different because here's someone who has a lot more proven track record, someone who's a much more year by year consistent and valuable player. And obviously, you watch the tape, you look at the numbers too. He's been incredible. He's been a Pro Bowler each of his last 5 years now, and he's reached double-digit sacks 4 times in his career. He's a very good player who can disrupt the pass, who can disrupt the run. I very much understand the Raiders are going to push for 2 first-round picks. I don't think that's a reasonable price. And I mentioned earlier, and I'll stick to it. Like I said, he's going to turn 29 before the end of the year. You're looking at if 2 first round picks. Those are 2 guys you're hoping are going to be with your team for 10 plus years. And obviously, it doesn't always turn out that way, but there's a lot of value in high level young prospects that you can have for cheap. Why would I give up two first round selections when acquiring two young, highly talented players who are going to be around for a lot longer than Crosby, who are going to be a lot cheaper than Crosby? That's the argument that I'd make from there. And I mean, obviously, you want Crosby. He's an incredible football player. I think even in negotiations, anybody, on either side is going to be willing to acknowledge that. The Raiders, obviously, parting with him would be able to acknowledge, hey, this is a tremendous football player that we're giving up. But I think the age plays a factor into it. I think the fact that he's just coming off of surgery too plays a big role. You factor in age, you factor in injury. There's the potential for regression. And do I think it's going to hit right away? I do not. I think that Crosby is an incredibly tough player. He's going to battle through it. Obviously, he wanted to play those last two games, but the Raiders shut him down in what I feel like is a pretty blatant tank move. You also look 2024, he missed 5 games as well. So while he had that kind of Iron Man status, you're starting to see him, slowly getting beat down the more he's in the NFL. So the age, the injury, the salary, sure, but that's a case everywhere else with Parsons, with Mack. But the age and the injury, I think, are two separate, distinct factors that separate him from that Parsons and Mack tier as far as trade value goes. I don't think the Raiders are going to get that level of a package from another team, from the Bears in this instance, than what you'd get from what the Cowboys got from Parsons, what the Raiders originally, the last or previous regime, got from Khalil Mack. So you're still going to get a haul. And I definitely think the Raiders would be smart to start with, be like, hey, if this is what these guys went for, we want that too. That's what they're going to say. But I think teams are going to call their bluff on it with the reasons that I gave you. And they're going to say, hey, look, I get where you're coming from, but that's not in the cards.
I want to talk about two players who are sort of on the board for possible Bears picks because both would be replacing guys that you're either going to cut for salary cap reasons or you might need to upgrade down the road. Let's start with CJ Allen. I've seen him mocked low first round to the Bears. Tremaine Edmonds is a guy that you're going, well, we're paying him 17 million. Is he part of a team going forward? Could we replace him? Is that a possibility that they go CJ Allen, in the first round and go, all right, let's take care of the linebacker spot, get something cheaper. We can then take Edmonds' money and focus on defensive tackle or even edge.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a value standpoint, it certainly checks out. I mean, the Bears are going to have the 25th pick, barring a trade up or trade down. And I have CJ Allen around that range on my board right now. So I think from a pure value standpoint, it checks out. Financially, it could make sense to cut Tremaine Edmonds. And it's tough to do when you look at, oh, he was really good in the first half of the season, but he started to slow down and then he got hurt, missed a couple weeks. And then when he came back, he wasn't very good. So now that's 2 whole years of, below average or below expectations of play compared to, all right, he was really good for 7-8 games. That's what we paid him for. That's what we like. But you also have whatever that ended up being, like 30, somewhere between 30, 35 games of play where he didn't live up to his contract. You have an easy out in his contract this offseason. I think they could end up doing it. So then naturally linebacker is going to become a need as well. I think they could draft a guy. I don't know if it's going to be in the first round, but I do think that it's something they could consider. Allen's a guy, I love his athleticism. I love his motor, his processing against the run. I'm really impressed with. He's not the biggest guy. He's not the strongest linebacker out there. Not like an Arvell Reese where he's 6'4", 240 pounds and can rush off the edge with the best of them. But he's still scrappy. He's got a high motor, and he can complement that athleticism and instincts with his aggressiveness. So he's someone I'd be happy with in the first round. Not my first choice, given I think there's a lot of really good defensive line value in this class around that 25 range, and that's the bigger need. But let's say if they do, say if they're able to move some money around to sign a Trey Hendrickson or Jalen Phillips, or they can get Odafe Alway to sign, and then that's your guy undisputed for 2026 to be in the starting lineup at edge alongside Montez Sweat, then yeah, you could consider a CJ Allen type. I think that's maybe not on a ton of Bears fans' radars right now, but I think it's a situation that could end up playing out. And by this time, 2 months from now, 2.5 months from now, leading up to the draft, it's something we talk about a little bit more.
Like I bring him up because I've heard comparisons to Jonathan Vilma. Who was Jonathan Vilma's DC New Orleans for a bit? That was Dennis Allen. I mean, Dennis Allen's probably looking at a guy like this going, this is my middle linebacker. This is my, running back, stuffing linebacker. A guy who he's fast, sideline to sideline. He's smart. He understands. I don't have to teach too much. I don't have to worry about him being an idiot. I mean, is this one of those guys where you might hear like Dennis Allen's really pushing, hey, we need a linebacker, let's take Allen.
I mean, I think it's possible. I look at him as a pretty high floor linebacker because of the instincts. And there are a lot of linebackers, and maybe they're bigger, maybe they're more physical, maybe there's a couple that are faster. But I think similar to, I mean, I don't think Allen's the same caliber of a prospect as Roquan Smith, but it's a similar body type, similar level of athleticism, similar strengths and weaknesses. Uh, to where you felt really good about Smith being a good impact player, and now he's been one of the best linebackers in the NFL. So I don't think Allen is. I think he's a little bit less strong as far as a play strength goes. I think Smith might have acted a little bit quicker on his reads than Allen, but Allen's still an instinctive, athletic linebacker. And those two tools in particular, I think, are going to make him a day one starter in the NFL. And I think you can justify using a late first round pick on that.
Finally, another guy that has been creeping up on the Bears, that's Caleb Lomu. And I get it, on first glance, you look at the Bears offensive line and go, no, no, they're fine. They got Jonah Jackson, they've got Darnell Wright, Joe Tooney, they got Drew Dahlman. Hey, they had a great find in Ozzie Trapilo. We're fine. But you dig deeper, it's like, well, could Jonah Jackson be a cap casualty in 2 years? Trapilo got injured. He has a torn patella. Will he be ready for next season? Hey, by the way, we're gonna have to pay big friggin' bucks to Wright, and he's a right tackle. So is that something that could be also be one of those things where at first glance we don't see it, but it's one of the things the Bears looking at going, we need to get a little bit cheaper on the offensive line. He could be the replacement for either Trapilo, or at worst case, Jonah Jackson. And hey, we save some money for when we have to pay Darnell Wright next year.
So I'd say, I mean, I'm not in a hurry to move off of Jonah Jackson after last year. I think he reverted back to his and maybe not Pro Bowl level, because I know he made the Pro Bowl with the Lions, but he was close to that level this year in Chicago. I'm not particularly in a rush to move off of him. Maybe uh, if he regresses next year, they could look to cut him. They have, an out in his contract if they so choose. I expect he's going to be more of a restructure candidate this year, where they anticipate he'll be on the roster in 2027, where Ben Johnson has the trust in him, having worked with him for a year here in Chicago, working with him in Detroit as well. It's the left tackle that I'm interested in too, though. I think that you mentioned Trapillo with the patellar tendon. I know that's a tough injury to come back from. With him being younger, with him being as mobile as he is, you have hope that he's able to get that, he's able to get back going and revert back to full strength, because he was showing some really encouraging flashes in the in his rookie season once he took over that starting left tackle spot. But it's no guarantee. So I think the more research they end up doing on Trapillo's medical situation, I think is going to determine how much they prioritize adding at left tackle this offseason. Uh, Lomu's a guy I'd really like in that 20 in at that 25th pick if they do end up needing a left tackle. I think he fits the athleticism mold to a T of what the Bears look for, especially in an outside zone run blocking scheme. He's somebody who's technically sound. He's got good spatial awareness and pass protection, keeps his head on a swivel against stunts, delayed blitzes, what have you. Knows his assignments as a run blocker. He's coordinated blocking on the move. Even if he's not the biggest guy, he's got okay strength and he's a little light in the pants, but he's just a very rock solid, high floor offensive tackle who I think is going to be good in the league for a long time. So if you can get that at 25, then that's fantastic. Again, I don't know what the medicals are going to end up looking like for Trapillo, but if things don't check out there, then I think left tackle starts to become an option in the first round. And then that's when you start to consider Lomu. And then in that case, he'd be my top choice.
How tough is that right now? Because as I said, it's in a perfect world, we're not talking about salaries, we're not talking about injuries. Like, all right, the offensive line's fine, but then as you said, you look forward to all right after next year, your stud right tackle who now is made an All Pro. Well, he's going to want franchise money, you know. Then all of a sudden, you look at Jackson and Tooney, and you go, well, they're getting paid 20 million apiece, so that's a lot of money. And with the left tackle, like again, if you are right now, Ryan Poles, how tough is it trying to figure out, okay, who do I restructure? Who do I cut? When do I start looking down the road in terms of, well, I need to replace defensive tackle now, but might need to replace an offensive lineman tackle next year. Like if you are Poles, how do you prioritize this without, this thing falling off the wagon?
So as far as the offensive line goes, I think they end up restructuring multiple players. I think, like I said, you look at restructuring from a perspective of who do we think is going to be on the team in 2027 and who can we give that later cap increase to so we can free up more cap space now. So someone like Tooney, I think where given how good Tooney's been, how good he was this year, how tremendous he was with the Chiefs, he's someone who's going to be on your roster in 2027 unless he retires. And then in that case, it becomes, null and void. And you don't have to worry as much about what the cap hit's going to end up being. Drew Dalman has been very, very good he was very good with the Falcons. He was very good this year, made it to the Pro Bowl, one of the top centers in the league. He's young enough too. I feel very confident he's not going to drop off enough to the point where, hey, we're paying him this big salary. He's really not worth it. There's been nothing to indicate that might be the case. Jonah Jackson, as things stand right now, I think could be a restructure candidate. Maybe they want someone with, a little more year by year consistency just because that 2024 season, he missed a lot of time to injury, wasn't very good with the Rams. Even though those couple of years of the Lions were very good, maybe it's like, all right, we want to see one more year before we determine, all right, we feel confident he's going to be on the team in 2027 and we're not going to cut him early due to cap space. So he's the only one of those guys I'm a little iffy on from a restructure perspective, but Tooney and Dalman, I think it's a safe bet. They'll be on the team in 27, so I feel fine increasing that cap hit. As far as Darnell Wright goes, I think the solution there is pretty simple because if you whether or not you cut Tremaine Edmonds this offseason or you let his contract expire in 27, that contract's coming off the books. The DeAndre Swift contract's coming off the books. No guarantee you bring him back either. Darnell Wright you'll have to pay, but as things stand right now, they have $53 million in cap space. If you cut Odeyingbo and you cut Grady Jarrett, two moves, which, I mean, that's a decision you'd have to make next offseason. But if they don't bounce back, that's the easiest way that they could free up. That's $27 million extra in cap space. That's Darnell Wright's cap hit and then some, just off of cutting those two guys who didn't really contribute that much this season. And if you address the defensive line in the draft this year, you hit on some guys, you're active in, maybe active in free agency, you sign another guy this offseason. You can afford to lose those guys because they're not living up to the expectations of their cap hit right now. So you extend Darnell Wright, you still have plenty of money to work with next offseason where you can sign, whatever it might be. If you need another left tackle, I don't know if they'd sign a free agent usually because guys of that caliber don't hit the open market. But you could draft a guy and then maybe add another defensive lineman. If you need a linebacker, you can afford a linebacker. If you need a corner or a safety, you can afford either of those two things. So they're going to have a ton of flexibility. Being able to afford Darnell Wright's not the issue. I think they get that done later this offseason so they don't have to worry about it in 27. But I'd say they have a lot more flexibility than I think a lot of people realize. And, they have the negative cap space this year. It's not pretty, but you have a lot of different moves that you can do to free up some cap space for one big swing this offseason, and then still have more than enough left to be able to afford some encouraging moves in 2027 as well.
Well, this is why he's the expert and I'm not. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Bears and NFL draft analyst and all around football guru. I give you from PFSN 365 and the Windy City Gridiron. I give you Jacob Infante. So, Jacob, before we let you go, where can fans check you out at? Where is the Patreon, the YouTube channel? I'm guessing you have a Substack somewhere. There's probably a Rumble channel and X and Instagram. Where can fans check out your work?
Yeah, so a lot of my work you can find. I tweet a lot over at Jacob Infante 24 is my X handle. I do Bears and NFL draft coverage over at Windy City Gridiron, Chicago Bears page affiliated with SB Nation, and I do NFL draft and general NFL stuff over at PFSN as well, Pro Football and Sports Network. So that's where you can find my written work as well as my Patreon. Uh, it's patreon.com/Jacob Infante. Uh, it's as low as $1 a month. So if you're looking for additional Bears or NFL draft insights, I strongly recommend considering that. Uh, yeah, that's a majority of where you can find my posts as well and my analysis. So that's it as far as the self promo goes. But yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on for sure.
Pleasure's all mine. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, Jacob Infante from the Windy City Gridiron PFSN 365. Always on a pleasure having you on the show. We come back. We got a lot more going on here, though. Only on it's Last Call. Last Call of the Alcohol, only on the last call podcast.com.